The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the well-manicured lawns of the quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of neighborhood where everything seemed perfect, gated, orderly, and silent, save for the occasional rustling of leaves in the cool evening breeze. The father, Peter, watched his daughter, Sarah, as she walked beside him along the familiar streets. It was hard to believe how much time had passed since she'd left for college. The little girl he had once driven to school was now a young woman, home for a brief visit before she returned to her demanding life as an FBI agent. Peter was proud of her, but something in the back of his mind nagged at him. There had always been something unsettling about this neighborhood, the way the HOA seemed to control everything, from the color of the houses to the height of the grass. But he never really thought much of it. After all, they had never had a real issue here. No one wanted to rock the boat. They walked past neatly trimmed hedges and rows of cookie-cutter houses, the hum of lawnmowers in the distance a comforting sound. "It's good to have you home," Peter said, trying to keep the conversation light, though his mind wandered to the unspoken tension that always lingered around the HOA's enforcers. Sarah smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the neighborhood as she walked. "Yeah, I missed you too, Dad. It's weird being back here after all the chaos at work." Peter chuckled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I suppose it's hard to leave behind the action." They turned the corner by the community park, where children played under the watchful eyes of their parents. The street lamps flickered on as the light began to fade, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. Peter, lost in thought, didn't notice the man approaching from the end of the street until he was almost upon them. He was dressed in a dark green security uniform, with the HOA logo emblazoned on his chest. His walk was stiff, purposeful, and as he closed the distance between them, Peter felt a subtle shift in the air. The man's gaze locked onto them, and for a brief moment, Peter wondered if he had ever seen him around before. "Excuse me, sir," the security guard called out, his tone sharper than expected. Peter's instinct was to dismiss him. After all, he was just a neighborhood security guard, right? They didn't even carry real guns, but something in the guard's posture made Peter hesitate. The man's eyes were hard, unblinking, as he came to a stop in front of them. "There's a problem," the guard continued, his eyes flicking to Sarah for a moment before narrowing. "You're in violation of HOA rules. You need to get back to your property immediately." Peter blinked, caught off guard. "What? We're just walking, nothing out of the ordinary." Sarah shifted beside him, sensing the unease in the air. She had a way of reading people, and it was clear that this man was more than just an enforcer of minor neighborhood rules. The guard didn't back down, stepping closer, and his eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that Peter didn't understand. "I'm afraid you're trespassing," he insisted, though his tone wavered slightly. "This area is off-limits after dusk, and I'm going to need to ask you both to leave." Peter frowned, his protective instincts kicking in. He was about to argue when Sarah, who had been silently assessing the situation, spoke up. "We're not trespassing. We live here," she said firmly, her voice calm but carrying an underlying edge of authority that Peter had never noticed before. The guard hesitated, looking her up and down as if processing her words, and then, without warning, his hand shifted toward his waistband. Peter's heart stopped. He watched in shock as the guard's fingers grazed the grip of a gun. Something was terribly wrong. This was no longer a simple disagreement over rules. It was turning into something far more dangerous. Before Peter could react, Sarah stepped in front of him, her body tensing, her gaze never leaving the guards. She said nothing, but in that brief moment, the air between them thickened with a silent understanding. Whatever was about to happen, it was no accident. The security guard's hand hovered over the gun, his eyes darting back and forth between Peter and Sarah. Peter felt a rush of panic flood his chest, his breath quickening as he instinctively stepped closer to Sarah, trying to protect her. The neighborhood, still so tranquil just moments ago, now seemed eerily silent, as if even the wind had stopped to watch. Sarah didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto the guard's hand, tracing the subtle movements of his fingers. Peter could feel her tense, but there was something else in her posture, something calm, controlled, like she had seen this kind of standoff before. It made him question just how much he truly knew about his daughter. The guard's fingers wrapped around the gun's grip now, and with a sharp exhale, he pulled it free. The weapon's cold, metallic sheen caught the last light of the setting sun, and for a brief second, Peter wondered if time had frozen. He had seen guns before, sure, but this felt different. His daughter was standing right in front of him, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. The guard's voice cracked as he spoke again, his words coming out slower, more deliberate. "You don't understand. I'm following orders. You have to move." Peter's mind raced. Following orders. Orders from whom? He wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but his throat felt tight. He wasn't sure if he was afraid for Sarah or afraid of what she might do next. He didn't know how deep this was going. Why would an HOA guard draw a weapon over something as minor as a rule violation? Sarah remained still, a silent resolve emanating from her. "Put the gun down," she said, her voice cool but carrying an authority that could not be ignored. The guard's eyes flicked to her, uncertainty creeping in. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not like this. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he stammered, his hand trembling slightly around the weapon. "But you're trespassing. I have to." "You're not trespassing," Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp. "We're not breaking any rules. And you don't have the right to pull that gun on us." Peter could hear the controlled anger in her voice, a tone that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. The world seemed to close in around them. The only sound the heavy thumping of Peter's heart in his chest. Who was this woman standing beside him? He looked over at her, his eyes searching for any sign of fear, but there was nothing, only a calm certainty that unsettled him. Sarah's eyes never left the guards, and she took a subtle step forward, lowering her voice just enough to be heard. "You're going to lower that weapon. Now," she said, her words almost a command, "before this gets out of hand." The guard flinched, his gaze flicking nervously to Peter, then back to Sarah. His hand was still shaking, but now there was confusion and fear in his eyes. You don't know who I am. I'm just doing my job." "I know exactly who you are," Sarah replied, stepping forward another inch, her gaze unwavering. "But that doesn't mean you get to threaten us." Peter's mind was a whirlwind. What was happening? He was starting to see that this wasn't just some routine misunderstanding. The guard wasn't just a frustrated neighborhood enforcer. He was afraid. He was more than just out of his depth. He was terrified of something beyond the immediate confrontation. But what? There was a long silence, and for a moment, it felt as though the world outside of their tiny bubble had ceased to exist. Finally, the guard's breath hitched, and he took a half step back, lowering the gun slightly but not completely. His posture was tense, as if unsure whether to obey the woman standing before him or to flee. Sarah's voice softened just a fraction. "Look, I don't want trouble, and neither do you. Put the gun down, and I'll make sure this all gets sorted out. But if you don't, I'll make you." The words hung heavy in the air. Peter couldn't breathe as he watched the guard's struggle unfold in real time. For a heartbeat, he thought the situation might de-escalate, but then the guard's gaze flickered to something behind them, almost as if he were expecting backup. Peter's pulse spiked. The guard wasn't alone. "Put it down," Sarah repeated, stepping forward again with slow, measured steps. The guard swallowed hard. His hand, still gripping the gun, seemed to shake harder. His eyes darted between Sarah's unflinching face and Peter's growing panic. Finally, with a reluctant motion, the guard lowered the gun, but only slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to break the deadly tension hanging between them. But Peter could see that the guard wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Something far darker was at play here. and they were just beginning to scratch the surface. The air still buzzed with the remnants of tension as the security guard reluctantly lowered his gun, but Sarah didn't move. She stood there, her posture as rigid as ever, the unwavering force that kept the situation from escalating. Peter, still shaken, couldn't tear his eyes away from the guard's nervous face. His hand still trembled around the gun, but at least it was now pointed downward. For a long moment, no one spoke. The neighbors, who had been watching from behind their curtains, seemed to hold their breath, as though they were waiting for the next move in an unseen chess game. Peter finally broke the silence. "What the hell is going on?" His voice came out hoarse, a mixture of fear and frustration. "Why the gun? Why were you going to shoot my daughter?" The guard swallowed hard, his eyes darting around, clearly unsure of how to respond. He shifted his weight nervously, glancing over his shoulder as though expecting someone to come rushing to his aid. When he spoke, his words came in short, anxious bursts. I don't want any trouble, but I have orders." "Orders?" Sarah interjected, her voice steady, but the edge was clear. "From who?" "The HOA. Who gave you permission to pull a weapon on people for walking down the street?" The guard hesitated, clearly struggling with how much he could reveal. His eyes flicked nervously to Peter, then back to Sarah. I can't say. I'm just following the rules. I'm just doing my job, okay?" Sarah's lips thinned in frustration. "Your job is to enforce rules, not intimidate people with a gun. Something isn't right here." Peter's mind raced. Just following orders. The words echoed in his head like a haunting refrain. The guard didn't seem like a rogue enforcer. He seemed like a pawn in something much bigger than he could understand, and that unsettled Peter more than anything else. "Listen to me," Sarah said, her voice turning low and serious. "You need to tell me what's really going on, because this is a hell of a lot more than just a simple HOA violation. This is about control, power, and I know when I'm not being told the truth." The guard's breath quickened. For a moment, it seemed like he might break. His eyes were filled with fear, and his posture betrayed a man who didn't feel in control of his own actions. Finally, with a strained voice, he muttered, "I don't know all the details, but there's something strange going on. I'm just a security guard. I was told to keep an eye on certain houses, certain people, but the orders keep changing. It's like they don't want anyone knowing what's happening here." Peter's stomach twisted. Certain houses, certain people. His mind couldn't make sense of it. This wasn't just a power trip from a lone security guard. There was something bigger lurking beneath the surface of their peaceful neighborhood. He felt the hair on the back of his neck rise as a sickening realization began to settle in. "Who are you working for?" Sarah pressed, stepping closer. "And who gave you these orders?" The guard's lips trembled, and for a moment, Peter thought he might crack. But then, just as quickly as it came, the guard's moment of vulnerability disappeared, replaced with a hardened look. "I can't tell you," he muttered, the words barely audible. "But you don't understand. You don't know what they'll do if you keep pushing." Peter felt the gravity of his words sink in. It was clear that the guard wasn't just a puppet in this situation. He was terrified of whoever was pulling the strings, and whatever they were, it was something far worse than a simple HOA oversight. Sarah wasn't ready to let him off the hook yet. "Tell me who's behind this, or I'll find out on my own. You can't hide from this." The guard seemed to consider the threat for a moment before he shook his head, his lips tight. "You don't get it. I'm just a small part of this. I don't know enough to help you. But I can tell you this. There's a reason they're so worried about who's in this neighborhood." Peter exchanged a glance with Sarah. It was clear they were both thinking the same thing. This was only the beginning. The neighborhood, once so idyllic, now felt suffocating. The quiet streets, the neatly trimmed lawns, it was all a facade, a mask hiding something far darker. And now, they were in the thick of it. The guard took a step back, his hand still twitching near the gun but no longer aimed at them. "I've said too much," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder once more, his eyes wide with panic. "You don't know what you're getting into. Just stay out of it, okay? Don't make it worse." But it was already too late. Peter could feel it. Their lives were no longer their own. They had stepped into a hidden world, a web of lies and corruption. And there was no going back. As the guard turned and hurried away, Sarah remained still, her eyes locked onto him, her mind already working through the puzzle pieces of this twisted game. There was more to uncover, and now they were in the middle of it. And they couldn't walk away. Peter and Sarah stood in silence, watching the security guard retreat down the street, his shoulders hunched, his pace quickening as if he were trying to outrun the truth. The sound of his footsteps faded into the quiet of the neighborhood, but the tension in the air seemed to linger thick and oppressive. The world around them had shifted. What had once been a peaceful suburban neighborhood was now the stage for something much darker. "Dad." Sarah's voice broke through the silence. Her tone was measured, but there was an edge to it. "We need to talk." Peter turned toward her, his mind still reeling from the encounter. His protective instincts were on high alert, but beneath that, a rising sense of unease was settling deep in his chest. The guard had been scared. That much was clear, but scared of what? And why had he drawn a weapon? It was just a damn HOA rule violation. Nothing more than a petty infraction. Yet the way the guard had acted, something was off. Sarah's eyes met his, her expression unreadable. "We're not just dealing with a rogue security guard. This goes deeper than that." Peter felt a chill crawl up his spine. His daughter's words held a weight that he wasn't prepared for. "What are you saying? This doesn't make any sense. He looked like he was about to shoot you." "I know," Sarah said, her voice low. "And that's not normal. Not for a neighborhood guard. Not for anyone in that position. He's afraid of something. There's something happening here. Something that's making people act like this. It's not about the HOA rules." Peter swallowed hard, trying to catch up with her line of thinking. But why? What could be so important that they'd go this far? His mind flicked back to the guard's cryptic words. "You don't know what they'll do if you keep pushing." Sarah shook her head slowly, clearly frustrated. "I don't know yet, but I can feel it. This neighborhood, this community, isn't what it seems. We've been blind to it. The HOA isn't just about keeping the lawns tidy and enforcing rules. That's just the front. There's something else they're hiding." Peter felt a knot form in his stomach. His daughter had always been sharp, too sharp sometimes. And now he saw it clearly. The way her FBI training had kicked in. The way she was piecing together fragments of the puzzle that didn't fit. She wasn't going to stop until she had answers. And that terrified him. "Are you saying it's connected to the HOA?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The thought of it made his skin crawl. The HOA. The group that controlled everything from how many trees you could plant to what color your house could be. It seemed like the farthest thing from a criminal organization. "I don't know," Sarah said, stepping closer to him, her gaze intense. "But that guard's fear. It's not just about us breaking some rule. The way he reacted, that's not normal. And I'm betting my life that he's not the only one who feels like this. They've probably got more people working for them. People who'll do whatever they're told." Peter's heart sank. He didn't want to believe it, but everything his daughter said made too much sense. This wasn't a simple neighborhood squabble. This was something far more sinister. Suddenly, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen before her expression hardened. "It's them." Peter's mind raced. "Them? Who?" he asked, but Sarah was already tapping furiously on the screen, her eyes scanning the text with precision. "They know we're onto them," she said, her voice low, but with a dangerous edge to it. "They're watching us. They know I'm FBI." Peter's stomach dropped, the weight of her words hitting him like a punch to the gut. They, whoever they were, had been watching her, and they had likely been watching him too, ever since Sarah had returned to the neighborhood. "I need to go," Sarah said, already moving toward her car, her movements swift and deliberate. "I need to find out who's behind this. And I need to do it fast." Peter didn't know what to say. Every instinct he had screamed at him to stop her, to make her go somewhere safe. But he knew Sarah. She wouldn't stop. Not until she got to the bottom of it. "Be careful," he called after her, his voice thick with worry. Sarah didn't turn around, but she nodded once, a grim determination in her stance. "I will, Dad. I'll be back soon. Just keep an eye out." Peter watched her drive off, the sound of her tires fading into the distance, leaving him alone in the growing twilight. A part of him wanted to go after her, to protect her. But he knew, deep down, that Sarah was already a step ahead. Whatever was going on, she was the one who could stop it. And for the first time, Peter wasn't sure if he was ready for the truth that was about to be revealed. But it was coming, and it was going to change everything. The evening sky had darkened by the time Peter turned back toward the house, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Sarah had left, but the unsettling feeling lingered. He knew she had to do what she had to do, but a part of him couldn't shake the image of her driving away, alone, into the unknown. He paced back and forth on the front porch, his thoughts racing. The neighborhood that had once felt like a haven now seemed like a trap. The security guard's actions, his cryptic warnings, and the fear in his eyes. It all pointed to something far bigger than HOA rules and regulations. Who was behind this? What were they hiding? His eyes drifted toward the row of houses lining the street, their windows dark, as the neighborhood settled into the quiet of night. It all looked so peaceful, too peaceful, as though everyone was living in a bubble, oblivious to the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. Peter's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw Sarah's name. He answered quickly. "Sarah." There was a brief pause before he heard her voice, low and urgent. "Dad, listen to me. I need you to be careful." Peter's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on? Have you found something?" "I'm digging, but I'm hitting walls. Whoever is behind this, they've covered their tracks well. But I think I've found something." Peter's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I can't explain it all right now, but there's something off about the HOA structure. It's more than just a neighborhood organization. It's a front. I've got a source who's giving me intel, but I'm not sure I can trust them yet." Peter's mind raced. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep your eyes open. I'm going to need your help, but I can't risk involving you just yet. I'm not sure who's watching me." "Sarah, you're not alone in this. I'll be there if you need me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Sarah spoke again, her voice tight with the weight of her words. "Dad, whatever you do, stay away from the HOA office. They'll know if you start asking questions, and you don't want to draw their attention." Peter's throat went dry. "Are you telling me the HOA is involved in something illegal?" "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted, "but I'm getting closer to the truth. Stay home, keep a low profile, and don't trust anyone in this neighborhood. Not anymore." The call ended abruptly, and Peter stood frozen for a moment, processing what she had just said. The HOA was involved in something darker than a simple neighborhood association, and his daughter, his brilliant, fearless daughter, was in the middle of it. His thoughts turned back to the guard, the fear in his eyes, the way he had warned them to stay out of it. Had he been trying to protect them? Or was he simply another pawn in whatever game the HOA was playing? Peter's eyes scanned the quiet street again, his mind racing. He needed to do something, but what? Sarah had warned him to stay low, but that didn't feel right. He couldn't sit idly by while his daughter was out there, digging deeper into this mess. His eyes caught something across the street, a figure standing just outside a house, hidden in the shadows. Peter's heart skipped a beat. It was a man, dressed in dark clothes, his face partially obscured by the hood of his jacket. He stood motionless, watching the house, watching Peter. Peter's instincts screamed at him to turn away, but he couldn't. There was something familiar about the figure. Had they been watching him? His mind raced, and before he could stop himself, he began moving toward the figure, his footsteps silent against the cold concrete. He didn't know who this person was, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the watcher held a key to whatever was going on. The figure turned abruptly, disappearing into the darkness before Peter could get any closer. "Damn it," Peter muttered under his breath. He had almost reached the edge of the street when he heard a low, creaking noise behind him. He spun around, his eyes narrowing, but all he saw was the empty street. Who the hell was watching him? He turned back toward the house, his heart pounding. Something was closing in on them, and the closer Sarah got to uncovering the truth, the more dangerous it became. Peter wasn't sure how much longer they could keep this up, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let Sarah face this alone. Whatever the HOA was hiding, he was going to find out. And he was going to make sure they paid for it. Peter didn't return to the porch. Instead, he stepped inside the house, his thoughts consumed by the figure he had seen across the street. Whoever it was, they were watching. And the way they disappeared so quickly, it wasn't just a casual glance. Someone knew they were digging into the HOA, and they were making sure Peter knew they were watching too. He walked past the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on the walls. His eyes flicked toward the front door, where Sarah had left, and his pulse quickened. Was she still safe? He grabbed his phone, hoping to hear from her, but there was no message. Nothing. The silence made the pit in his stomach grow deeper. He wasn't used to waiting for news, especially not when it felt like the walls were closing in. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It had been over an hour since their call. Something wasn't right. Sarah had said she was getting closer to the truth, but she hadn't shared any specific details. Peter tried to push back the worry gnawing at him. She was smart, capable, but she was also in danger, and that terrified him. The phone buzzed in his hand, and Peter snapped to attention. It was a text from Sarah. "I need you to meet me. No one can know. Don't tell anyone." His heart skipped a beat. Meet her? Where? He quickly typed back. Where? A minute passed. Then another message appeared, behind the old community center. Now. The urgency in her words made his blood run cold. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. The old community center was at the edge of the neighborhood, a place that had been abandoned for years. It was the perfect spot to keep things hidden, away from prying eyes, tucked into the shadows of the forgotten. Peter moved quickly, slipping through the back door of the house and into the alleyway that led to the street behind. The air was sharp, cutting through his jacket as he walked briskly toward the center. He had no idea what he would find there, but he knew he needed to reach Sarah before anyone else did. As he neared the community center, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. The building loomed ahead, dark and ominous. It was silent, save for the faint sound of rustling leaves in the wind. No sign of Sarah. He looked around carefully, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Sarah. His voice was a low whisper, barely audible in the stillness. He heard a faint creak behind him, and his heart skipped a beat. Whipping around, Peter's eyes immediately locked onto a figure stepping from the shadows, tall, with a hood pulled low over their face. "Dad, get down." The voice was barely a breath, but it was unmistakable. Before Peter could react, he felt a sudden pressure against his back, followed by a deafening crack of gunfire. He dropped to the ground instinctively, heart pounding, as the bullet whizzed past him, narrowly missing. Sarah had been right behind him, already diving for cover as the shots continued. "Stay down," she yelled. "They know we're onto them." Peter's chest tightened, and he quickly rolled behind an old dumpster for cover. He could hear the sound of boots pounding the pavement, and the low, steady rhythm of people moving toward them. They were surrounded. A figure emerged from the shadows, illuminated by a flickering street lamp. It was the same man Peter had seen earlier, the one who had been watching from across the street. His face was still hidden, but his posture was unmistakable. This was no ordinary person. Whoever was behind this was organized, and they weren't afraid to use violence to protect their secrets. Peter's breath caught in his throat. Who are they? Another voice cut through the air, a low, commanding tone that sent a shiver down his spine. You think you can just interfere with us? Think again. The voice belonged to a man, his silhouette barely visible in the dark, but the authority in his voice was undeniable. Peter strained to hear the words, but the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Sarah's voice came again, more urgent this time. Dad, get ready. I'm moving to the other side. Peter nodded, adrenaline kicking in. He had never seen his daughter in action like this. Calm, focused, even under fire. She was prepared, but Peter wasn't about to let her take the lead without him. Not anymore. This was no longer about the HOA rules. This was something bigger, something that threatened their entire way of life. As Sarah moved to reposition herself, Peter counted the seconds, trying to gauge where the attackers were. He had to trust that she knew what she was doing. He couldn't let fear take over. He peeked around the dumpster, his eyes narrowing as he saw the figure shift, taking aim. But before he could move, there was a sharp crack, and everything went black. The last thing Peter heard was Sarah's voice calling his name before everything dissolved into darkness. Peter woke to a sharp, throbbing pain in his head. His vision blurred, the world spinning as he tried to sit up. A jolt of nausea hit him, forcing him to stay still for a moment. He blinked hard, the shadows of the room sharpening into focus. Dim light filtered through a cracked window. Concrete walls surrounded him. He was in some kind of storage room. His hands were free, but his legs were weak. He'd been out cold. Memories hit him in a rush. The ambush, the gunfire, Sarah shouting his name. Sarah, he muttered, forcing himself upright. Panic spiked through him. Where was she? The door creaked open, and a woman stepped inside. Not Sarah. Someone older, with a severe expression and the kind of icy calm that made Peter's skin crawl. You're lucky, she said flatly. You were supposed to be a message, but your daughter is persuasive. Peter's heart jumped. Where is she? The woman smirked. She's alive. For now. She bought you time. Peter's fists clenched. Who are you? What the hell is this HOA really hiding? The woman tilted her head. This isn't about homeowners. It never was. The HOA is just the shell. The board is made up of former contractors, intel brokers, and one or two who don't exist on paper. We needed a place to blend in, hide our operations. Suburbia made the perfect camouflage. Peter's blood ran cold. Operations. She stepped closer. Information control. Blackmail. Surveillance. Data laundering. Every homeowner here is under constant monitoring. Every phone call. Every internet search. Every camera in and around these homes feeds into our system. It funds real operations, ones the government pretends don't exist. Peter stared in disbelief. You're telling me this neighborhood is a front for a spy ring? The woman smiled faintly. A little crude, but yes. And your daughter? She's a problem. Peter's jaw tightened. She's FBI. If anything happens to her, we're aware. That's why she's not dead. The woman leaned in. But if she keeps digging, keeps pushing, she'll leave us no choice. Peter's rage boiled over. She's not going to stop. You should know that. The woman's smile faded. Then you'd better convince her to, before she forces us into a corner. The door slammed shut, plunging Peter back into shadows. But now he knew. This wasn't just about Sarah. The entire neighborhood had been turned into a surveillance trap, a false paradise wrapped around something cold and monstrous. And Sarah, he had no doubt, was still out there, probably already planning their next move. He had to escape. Warn her, help her bring this sick operation into the light. He stood shakily, tested the doorknob. Locked, of course, but something glinted near the floor. A tiny pin. A clue. He smiled grimly. She left it for me. His daughter wasn't just a fighter. She was already 2 steps ahead. And now it was his turn to catch up. Peter gripped the tiny metal pin Sarah had slipped under the door. It was from her field gear, a signal, a silent message that said, "I'm here. Hold tight." He studied the room. The walls were bare concrete, but the ventilation grate above him was loose. A chair helped him reach it, and with careful prying using the pin, he dislodged the cover. The air duct was tight, but he pushed through. Crawling in the dark, Peter forced himself forward. Every scrape, every metal groan made his heart pound. But the fear couldn't stop him. Sarah was out there, and he wasn't about to let her fight this alone. Minutes later, he dropped silently into a hallway, dimly lit, lined with storage doors. The facility was hidden beneath the old community center, exactly the kind of covered setup Sarah had warned about. Somewhere above this maze, she was moving, planning, fighting. Suddenly, footsteps echoed. Peter ducked behind a pillar as 2 armed men walked past, murmuring into radios. She took out Simmons. They're saying she breached the server room. By herself. Dan. Peter smiled. Of course she did. He moved in the opposite direction, searching for stairs, any exit point. That's when he heard it. A series of sharp, controlled gunshots. Then silence. Sarah. He followed the sound through a side corridor, where a security door was ajar. Inside, he found it. Rows of high-end computer equipment, sparking and hissing, riddled with bullet holes. And in the center, crouched behind an overturned metal desk, was Sarah, calm, rifle in hand, scanning for movement. Peter stepped in carefully. Sarah. She turned fast, gun rising, then froze. Dad. Relief flickered across her face, quickly masked by resolve. You're supposed to be out. Yeah. Well, you trained me too well. She rolled her eyes but smiled, just briefly. I found their data hub. Everything. Surveillance logs, agent identities, offshore accounts. It's all here. I'm copying it now. We're bringing this entire network down. Peter nodded, adrenaline coursing. What's the plan? We get to the server room's uplink, send the intel straight to the Bureau's shadow server. Once it's out, we ghost. FBI Tactical is already inbound, but we need to move. They moved fast, weaving through back corridors and ducking between crates. Sirens began to blare. Someone had triggered lockdown. Steel shutters clanged into place as red lights bathed the hallways. We're cut off, Peter shouted. No, Sarah said, pulling a detonator from her vest. They built this place like a bunker, but they forgot who trained me. She slapped a small explosive onto the server room's side wall. Cover your ears. The blast rocked the hallway, fire and smoke surging as the wall buckled inward. They dove through the opening just as more gunmen swarmed in behind them. Peter and Sarah returned fire, moving in perfect sync, ducking and covering, a 2-person strike team in a war zone beneath suburbia. Finally, Sarah reached the uplink, jammed in her drive, and hit send. All of it? Peter asked, breathless. She checked the screen. 100%. All of it. In the distance, helicopters approached. The cavalry had arrived. They emerged from the smoke-covered ruins of the HOA's secret lair, faces lit by the flashing lights of tactical teams landing around them. One agent saluted Sarah. Commander Reeves, we've received the intel. Operation Suburb is over. Peter looked at his daughter, still steady, still fierce. You always did like the quiet neighborhoods, he said, half laughing. She smirked. Next time, let's move somewhere without espionage. Twist ending. As Sarah and Peter walked away, the FBI agent who had saluted her pulled out a phone and made a call. They shut down the branch, but the other neighborhoods remain untouched. Orders. A distorted voice replied on the line. Let them celebrate. For now. The end.